Hagen Schulz Forberg, who's a professor at Aarhus University, to talk about origins, crisis, directions, and roughly 100 years of neoliberalism. Hagen is going to talk for about half an hour, and then we're going to have a conversation and some questions from the audience. So, take it away.
Thank you. So I hope you can still hear me. Yes. Sorry for just bursting out just a minute ago. I didn't know the mic was already on. Thank you so much for coming and for having me. I hope I'll not be too boring about 100 years of neoliberalism, which sounds like a long time, but as a matter of fact, that's one of my main points when we talk about the Mont Pelerin Society, is that they are one of many organizations or meeting points, platforms, where ideational constellations were discussed, where also the agenda of neoliberalism was, not made, but shaped. One of the conversational partners, one of many. It's not a story of origin beginning on Mont Pelerin. So who am I? Why am I doing this? And why am I invited here? As Daniel said, I'm at Aarhus University. I'm a conceptual historian, which is a German thing, but it's also pretty big in Scandinavia, Begriffsgeschichte. And so I like to enter historical context through exactly concepts. And neoliberals were very good at doing the same thing. So they were very aware of the terms they were using. They were very aware of the strategies they employed in order to get hegemonize the meaning of a couple of words and some concepts, which then, were filled with semantics and interpretations that they were kind of providing. It's a discursive battle, of a semantic battle, of winning over the meaning of the good society, of welfare, of employment, of flexibility, of what the market is. All of these discussions, of course, they were not alone, but they were very strong in finding ways to communicate their opinion. And that was sitting on a large network of policy making and expertise. So I think my main point here, one of my main points regarding the Mont Pelerin Society, is that we need to decentralize them a little bit if we want to understand the history of neoliberalism a bit better and draw some lessons from it, also regarding what we're going to do maybe today. So in my talk, I will hopefully be not too boring when I go a bit into detail to illustrate how those networks functioned and where we need to start and where I looked in order to find all of this. As a historian, obviously, I go to archives every now and then. It's great. I've just been to Geneva and read in the files of my neoliberals who've become sort of close to me. I don't know whether that's a good thing. Let's see. I started this 12, 13 years ago and I thought, it's going to be easy. I'm just going to criticize them, but it's complicated. It's complicated. So one of the stories that say, how do we start understanding neoliberalism? Quite often we pick out the bad guys, right? So that's one of the things we do. The one on the left is Friedrich Hayek, and the one on the right is Ludwig von Mises, and they're often seen as like the intellectual godfathers of a radical market doctrine, which kind of shaped in Vienna in the salon where in the office where Ludwig von Mises held a salon, and then they met again in Mont Pelerin. So that's one of the things that people have been doing, kind of intellectual bad guys, which is historically a bit counterintuitive because they've became famous or well-known in the 80s or 90s, and then for exactly this form of neoliberalism that we all have in our heads today, mostly a quite radical free market ideology. And then it's kind of pushed backwards or projected backwards to history, assuming that they've always thought the same. Well, again, it's a bit more complicated. So I'm sorry, it's not Mont Pelerin, sorry about that, where we need to go if we want to find the origins of neoliberalism. Because it did emerge after the First World War in transnational institutional networks, in the clustering of institutions around the League of Nations, and networks of scholars and experts that all gathered there to answer the big questions. So neoliberalism was one of many answers to a much bigger question. And those questions were not small. The League was kind of ambitious, thinking that it is the representation of civilization. Obviously, with a Western bias, civilization was shorthand for, what Europe should be or what the West is all about. So there are global hierarchies we definitely need to talk about in the constructions of neoliberalism. But the bigger questions were, what are the relations between economy and peace? What's the relation between state organization and markets? How do we get peaceful change? How do we arrive at collective security? These questions were big questions at the time, and the League of Nations started to grow an institutional network which was very impressive. I don't know when it comes, but let me just move forward a little bit. This is the network that grew out of the League. It looks good. I just put it out there to impress you. This is the work of a colleague who actually went through the whole archive of what is called the International Institute for Intellectual Cooperation, which was set up in the 20s and started to grow in the 30s. And it's indicative of something that we still see today. It's the beginning of a certain way of making knowledge and shaping knowledge into policy speech. So you have think tanks, you have private foundations. In this case, it's the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Endowment, to sponsor, plus national governments, to sponsor research for larger questions, for bigger questions, assuming that when intellectuals from all of these countries communicate with each other, it's going to have an effect, namely mutual understanding for the sake of global peace. So neoliberalism, that may be counterintuitive, also is one of the answers to the question, how can we arrange a global peaceful order? That's part of it, part of the story. So when I say where does it come from or where do we need to look, well, these are the places that are very important. That is, I don't know whether you know it, the one below here, that is the Palais des Nations, you know it. Probably it's in Geneva, which is where the headquarters were of the International Committee for Intellectual Cooperation ever since the 1920s. And above that is the Palais Royal in the middle of Paris, where the IIIC, the IIIC, had its offices. And this is where a very important, by now mythical meeting was held in 1938, the so-called Walter Lippmann Colloquium. You can Google it and read it, and there's a book about it, and many books even, which is where liberals or experts from within these networks had just another meeting. They had these meetings all the time.